full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this evening's Education Tonight with myself, Adam Spence, and
myself, Seamus, Brendan, Martin, Patrick McPolan, who had to change his social media at behest of individuals to make myself harder to find, which is quite ironic considering I'm a public figure. But anyway, here we are.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, so it's kind of, we're rocking through this half term, starting to feel it, starting to get the cold nights, the dark mornings, that type of thing. But tonight we're really fortunate that we're going to be joined by Steve Bladden, who's going to talk us through the legacy of COVID in our school. So we're really looking forward to that. We're also going to look, Brent, at these maybe increasing the school day. Is the school day at the appropriate length at the minute? Kind of what is the situation around the world, which is interesting. But I thought kind of when you were on a quick nostalgic trip, I don't know what age you were, but we were really young at school. I just kind of said to you in year 8 when this appeared in our kind of RE lessons. I was year 8, so I'm like 12 years old, but it was back on TV last night, which kind of amazing. It was really kind of blast from the past. Yeah, have you been able to show this to any kids during your career?
Well, I've always showed clips from Terminator 2, the blast scene, not the James Cameron director's cut, because that's got the skeleton going like that. I've shown The Day After, which is the American version of Threads, which was first broadcast in 1983. That's the one that got Reagan out of his bed and basically went, whoa. Similar to Threads, not as psychologically kind of as bad. And it's got the same sort of scenario of what do you do afterwards. It doesn't get into the idea of the nuclear winter or the kind of complete and utter breakdown of society. What's interesting about Threads is obviously I watched it when I think I was 7. And it was 1985 when it was broadcast the second time. And my parents, God bless them, they had no problems with me watching stuff like that. Or I remember watching War Games when I must have been at the same age with, the computer working out. So a child of the Cold War and a child of the Troubles was a heightened sense of the world. And I don't think my childhood was very normal of what you would have now, because I understood exactly what a thermonuclear war would be from watching movies like Terminator, from watching War Games. And they were all the rage, weren't they, back in the 1980s? But, the Rocky movies, I know Rocky 4 was one of my favorites. And you have Ivan Drago and Sylvester Stallone. And there's a lovely scene in that when he's like, I could change. You could change. We all could change. And Mikhail Gorbachev is like,
I have actually found a picture of you when you were younger. That we're talking about from last week. Is that the hair you talk about?
I wasn't far off. I did have a mullet. I had the bowl cut though. I had literally my auntie, God rest her. She's not dead yet. She literally had a blonde bowl. No, that's me, Pat Sharp, 1991, maybe. That was more in the kind of thing. But I won the glasses then. No, I definitely won the glasses then. But certainly, what's interesting about Threads is the psychological sort of thing it plays out of what would happen. And what's interesting about it is that I wouldn't use it now to talk to children about what's going on. However, and this is interesting, I've had kids ask me the question, and since I think Putin said something along the lines of he would attack London, I had a student ask me, sir, what would the impact of, say, a nuclear bomb in London be? And I brushed off my old Cold War sort of knowledge and went, well, it all depends on the wind, it all depends on the fallout. And little did I know less than a week later, I'd be watching Threads. But I wouldn't show that. I tell you the reason I wouldn't show it, because it's based in Sheffield, which is not far away from us. and it impacts upon the Peak District, which is not far away from us.
Yeah, I think that's why it really hit home. It was the kind of the closeness to us. But we're keen to kind of get Steve on because you're going to join us later. So I just wanted, before we do that, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, John Katz. You want to say hi to John, Brent?
Hi, John.
TT. Obviously, so you've got publishers of development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore a full range of titles. Use the code, as always, JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. And we're also pleased to be supported by Reading Solutions UK, and is the home of the Dreambox Reading Plus, an online reading development program. Creates stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised pathway built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas of improvement. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. So search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request a free pilot. So without further ado, if we bring kind of Steve into the room. Good evening, Steve.
Steve.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. Okay.
Hi, Steve.
Sorry, I wasn't sure whether I needed my camera on or not.
Okay, well, your camera's on and you're looking great. So thank you for joining us this evening. So we've kind of entitled the show the legacy of COVID in our schools. I think some of us have kind of got a bit kind of carried away with kind of doing the return to normal. I remember that being mentioned. So kind of what's the picture? What's the kind of the legacy of COVID from your opinion in our school system at the moment?
Wow. Well, it's a big question, isn't it? And first of all, I must apologise. I've got a very husky voice, and sadly for me, that's the legacy of COVID in my body. I have times when I can barely speak, so I'm a bit husky tonight. And if I sound a bit breathless, don't worry. It's just how it is. So,
yeah.
COVID. Firstly, I'd like to start by saying. I'm not here to criticize educators or schools or anybody personally. I have quite strong views about COVID and about what's happening throughout the education system and throughout society. But really, it's with a mind on people's safety and well-being and long-term health. And as much as anything, it's driven by a desire to prevent anybody else suffering the fate that I've suffered and that many, many others have suffered, including huge numbers of teachers and school leaders and educators, as well as children. So that's kind of my beginning. I'm not sure how much you know about me, but I was a head teacher for 12 years. I worked in education for 24 years. I've worked in total for 30 years. And I was working through the pandemic. I left headship in January of 2023 after, at that point, having had long COVID for well over a year. And I'm currently out of work. I'm unemployed and unable to work due to what COVID has done to me. I'm not saying that for sympathy, but to give everybody who's listening some context, that's the reality of it. I was fit and healthy, loved my job, still love teaching.
How have you found the acceptance of the fact you have long COVID? I mean, how have you found the reception that you get when you say, look, I've got long COVID. I got long COVID during the pandemic. I was at school. How has that been received by different groups?
It's a mixture, and to be honest, I mean, I think you'll know if you follow my tweets and my blogs, I write quite often and quite candidly about my journey. I'm not interested in scaremongering, but I think people need to know about the human cost of COVID. And every time I write anything, I have to brace myself because I get significant levels of abuse from people, from trolls, from around the world. If I put something on Twitter X, I'll receive awful comments and DMs, as well as very, very supportive messages. But there have been times when I've simply not said anything because I've not been in a position where I can deal with the negativity and the nastiness. Some people still think COVID doesn't exist. Some people tell me I'm vax damaged. Some people tell me I'm mentally ill. Some people tell me I'm lazy, that I'm a scrounger. I'm not sure why anybody would sacrifice their health and their career and try and live on universal credit. But those are the things you face. I wouldn't quite say I'm at peace with my condition, but I've accepted my cards. We all, good health is a privilege. We don't always realize what a privilege good health is until it's taken away. I'm sorry, I've slightly gone off a tangent in answer.
No, it's because we went through it. Both Adam and I are obviously, like yourself, we're educators throughout the pandemic, and one of the reasons I ended up doing Teachers Talk Radio was obviously I was a frequent caller into BBC, LBC, and anybody basically hammering on, we are frontline. This is happening in schools, and I'm a union rep and also a Green politician, and both my union and political party were saying the same thing. So I've been there and tried to argue that safety and security of the children, safety and security of staff is important, ventilation is important. However, of course, we are hearing the other side now, which is lockdowns were damaging to children, and you getting the kind of, we should never do this again. We should never, schools are that important. And you're getting the kind of contradictory thing of schools are so important that we should never lock down them again. However, we don't seem to want to give you that much more funding or increase the ventilation. And I do find there's a contradiction of saying one thing and then actually the cavalry doesn't come to help you out, do the thing that they're saying you should do, if that makes sense. So how do you find that disconnect between the reality of, okay, schools are that important, however, in reality, where is the policy towards ensuring that schools are safer in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. When we all think back to March 2024, I mean, I remember when the Boris Johnson and the senior cabinet announced the lockdown, and myself and my SLT, we gathered in the school office, and we found out, like everyone else did, there was going to be the first lockdown. And I'll never forget that day. It was the most profound, emotional, disturbing time of my career. And but it struck me that my duty was to keep my school community safe. Mm-hmm. And none of us knew what was going to happen, but I just felt compelled as the head. I had a duty of care to 80 colleagues, to a school of 500 children, to a town where we're the only primary school. And my duty was to keep those people safe. And a secondary duty was to try and keep myself safe so I could protect my family. Mm. And we've gone from a time where 4.5 years ago, I'm not making a comment right now about whether that was right or wrong to lock down, but we locked down schools because it was felt the right thing to do, and society was locked down. Mm-hmm. But what we did was we recognized that there was a risk of something very dangerous, and we knew as citizens we had to protect one another. So we took a drastic measure of locking down, and that's how seriously we took a virus that was unknown.
Yeah.
Fast forward 4.5 years, coming up for 5 years, and it's 6 school years that have been spanned by this.
Yeah.
We're now at the total opposite end of the spectrum in terms of precaution. Mm-hmm. So what do we do now to protect people from the same airborne virus? We do absolutely nothing. And I know some schools and academies do some things, but generally not. It's not normal, for example, to have air filtration systems or to have lots of COVID protocols. We've gone from telling people, stay safe, stay indoors, don't see your family, don't go outside, don't mix with people, to saying, don't test for COVID. If you have tested for COVID and you've got it, come to school if you're well enough. And I'm talking about both staff and pupils. But we've gone further than that. We now put pressure on people when they're ill, including employees and pupils. And I'm in various forums. My world is education. Most of my friends are in education. My wife is a teacher. I've got 4 kids at 3 different schools. I know what's happening in all types of schools. And what's happening in some instances is absolutely dystopian. We've gone from telling people to be careful of a really dangerous virus to sending attendance teams round to people's houses when they're off with COVID because we think they should be in school.
Yeah.
That's how far we've come as a society. We've gone from protecting people to telling people, go to school, go to work. Doesn't matter if you're ill, doesn't matter if you spread it, doesn't matter if there are vulnerable people in your class, in amongst your colleagues, doesn't matter if you're vulnerable, if you're susceptible, don't wear masks. You've got no idea who's ill. And if you're not in work or you're not in school, we're going to put pressure on you so that you feel bad, so that you come back. Because
can I just challenge the kind of thing?
I think learning is the most important thing of all.
Yeah, can I challenge the kind of nothing thing? Because obviously a lot of staff are vaccinated.
Yeah.
So the goalposts have moved a little bit. So you wouldn't go back to like the full testing, full mass, because some staff are vaccinated, aren't they? Or a lot of staff are vaccinated. So there needs to be kind of another policy. It doesn't need to be kind of what we were at, but there just needs to be a new policy in terms of, with the risk kind of reassessed in this new kind of world where people are vaccinated. Because obviously those things had to happen because no one was vaccinated. So it's the risk does change, doesn't it, to where we are now?
Yeah, so the risk has changed, and don't get me wrong, I'm not about scaremongering, but let's objectively, at first we had lockdowns because we didn't know what we were dealing with, and there was no vaccination.
Yeah.
So now many people are vaccinated, not everybody, but the reality is the vaccination doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. Yes, for many people, it mitigates the symptoms, but the reality is it does not stop you getting COVID. It does not stop you from getting long COVID. It does not stop you from getting ME, which I've now got, dysautonomia, which wreaks havoc with your autonomic system. It doesn't stop the organ damage, which COVID can do, even if you just have a mild case of COVID. It doesn't stop the risk of heart attack or strokes, which have been increased significantly since the emergence of COVID. So you're absolutely right, Adam. We're not dealing with the same situation as we were in spring 2020, but the risks from COVID are very, very real. And we know, for example, well over, I think it's 2 million adults in the population with long COVID. It's around 120,000 school-age children. These are all people who weren't living with chronic illness 4 years ago. I've been both through the long COVID clinic and the ME, chronic fatigue syndrome clinics. I'm under their care at the moment. Do you know who the biggest group of people in those clinics are?
Probably public sector, front-facing public sector workers, nurses, teachers, people like that.
Yeah, nurses and teachers. And I'm currently under the chronic fatigue service. Teachers and head teachers are the biggest group of people in that service.
I think support staff had a hit as well,
and school support staff. I'm in Facebook group and a WhatsApp group for teachers and school leaders whose lives have been turned upside down by COVID. And so, yeah, coming back to your point, Adam, you're right. There is the vaccine. So I'm wrong to say there's nothing.
Yeah.
But equally, society is basically pretending like the vaccine has given us all the protection in the world.
Yeah.
And it's
so what you're really saying is there's a recklessness and lessons aren't learned. And because one of the things that concerns me, should the same thing happen again, you get after inquiries, don't you? Lessons were learned. And what sort of worries me about ventilation in schools, because it's a bit like people who don't believe in climate change, right? Fine. You don't believe in climate change, but do you not want a cleaner environment? Do you not want air that you breathe is better? Because we know that air outside school, outside children's lungs, when you have roads next to schools, that is damaging to health. We know that air quality has killed children. The first child who's died in the world, who's on their actual death certificate, is asthma caused because of pollution from cars, and that's Ella Kissy-Delly and met her mum Rosamond. They've campaigned with mums with lungs. We know that children spend a lot of time indoors. So the thing is, you've got on the one hand, we know that we have air quality issues in school, because I know that I've had myself. I mean, sometimes when our ventilation is in summer, temperatures in the room, humidity, all of those things actually say to you, it impacts upon not only just the health of children, but concentration, outcomes, comfort, even to the point where psychologically speaking, children who are hot and humid are more likely to kick off and cause behavioral problems. I think, so what I can't understand, and maybe you might be able to explain to me, Steve, is why you would not invest, even if you don't believe in COVID, ventilation in schools is actually a good thing, because there are other benefits to ventilation in schools, because we all know, those of us who have been teachers long enough, that when you start out as a teacher, you never get as ill in the first year of teaching, because you are in a small space with 30 children, and let's just be honest, they don't wash their hands sometimes. And schools are, well, let's be honest with you, petri dishes when you're dealing with a lot of children in confined spaces. Why do you think there hasn't been, like in Germany, there was in November 2020, a sort of program of let's put some air filtration in school? Because what's the reason not to do it? If it's, even if you don't believe in COVID, I think COVID was all made up. Certainly clean air for children in classrooms is not a bad thing, is it, really?
I mean, I scratch my head about this, and it's absolutely baffling, because we've known now for years that COVID is airborne. And I don't know about you, but I'm watching the COVID inquiry live and following it really intently. I'm actually contributing to the COVID inquiry with another hat on. But it's fascinating that all of the people contributing, there's still disagreement about what COVID is and what's causing it. And there's still key people in the inquiry saying, no, it's not airborne. The bottom line is, this is an airborne condition. And we know that one of the things in our gift is to have cleaner air. And even if you part COVID, as you say, we could think about children with asthma, with other chronic conditions, with allergies, and clean air is scientifically proven to reduce allergies, to reduce virus transmission, to improve cognition, to improve mood, to thereby improve behavior, to improve the general well-being of staff and adults, staff and pupils. When you think about that as educators and as responsible citizens, you have to ask the question, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you want clean air in a classroom? Even if COVID hadn't come into this earth, why wouldn't you want clean air? Because one of the first things we were told was, open your windows. We had our windows open at my school for several years. Some of the classes in our old building were absolutely freezing. But there is some fascinating research about clean air. Is it okay if I just tell you some of it?
Yeah, sure. Well, very quickly, yeah, because we don't get too into that. We want to
okay. So for example, 2023 in Bradford, there was something called the Class Act Study. That's capital ACT.
Yeah, we covered that, didn't we, with Karen Bales on a podcast?
Okay.
Yeah, so we've covered that, Dart. Yeah, we've
Okay.
covered
So
that. It's good feature.
one of the findings was that schools with filters, the illness absence rate reduced by 20%. In California, nothing to do with COVID, but there was an incident where some toxins were released into the atmosphere, and as a consequence, in that state, some of the schools, many schools, they had a type of air filtration system put into their schools, and what they found in those schools was that the pupils' test results, their attainment, increased by the equivalent to reducing class sizes by 1/3. That's as teachers, that appeals to me. And then a final one, during the pandemic in Italy, in Central Marsh region, there were 300 classrooms out of 10,000 installed with air filters in the thick of the pandemic. And in those schools, in those 300 classrooms where they had the highest filtration rate, COVID cases specifically were lowered by 82%.
Yeah. Brent, you kind of go to a lot of NEU meetings and stuff. Why isn't this something that's been banged at? Why isn't this drum being banged really heavily at conference, NEU meetings?
It was, to be fair, during the pandemic. I can't fault the unions.
No, I'm talking about now. I'm talking about kind of.
No, I'm not going to lie to you. It has slipped down the agenda because we're overloaded. It's because it's recruitment, retention. We're just in education. We're firefighting at the moment, which is ironic because part of the reasons we are firefighting is because of the chronic underfunding, which I do think is one of the reasons why they aren't doing things like filtration systems, because that would have a program of sort of thing. But I also think there's a more sinister thing going on, and that's liability and health and safety. Now, health and safety officers, unions are now hotter on appointing health and safety officers, and obviously looking at things like asbestos. That's another one that's going to come down further on down the line. I'd expect there is already legal cases, but within a generation, we're going to see people who are going to be suggesting that I got asbestos at school because 75% of the school estate has asbestos. That's another sleeping, ticking time bomb, that one. And we've talked a lot about that. But you're right. I can't tell you that we just get overloaded with other things and this just got pushed down the agenda. And I think Steve's point is right. There is a bit of a selective amnesia when it comes to COVID, in a sense that it's a weird situation that is almost like it didn't happen. Like you and I were talking just about the Cold War, that, the start of Threads we were talking about. Well, the start of the Threads was the Americans and the Russians invading Iran. And you think, well, that's actually 40 years later what might actually be the scenario now. And it's a strange thing that happens. I think people either don't want to remember it or it becomes a bit of a blur, because the COVID period for me is starting to turn into a kind of blurry, weird time.
Yeah. I just wonder if it was like such a trauma, the way we're dealing with the trauma is to try and just move on, and let's just kind of move on as a group, and let's just kind of pretend that didn't happen. That's kind of a psychological trick that we're all trying to play with each other. They're all just trying to
I honestly think there are people who are purposely not wanting to remember, because the more you look at something, the more you start to ask questions, obviously what Steve is doing, because he is impacted probably. He could feel it more. It's a bit like Grenfell, Hillsborough, all of those. There's a process where it's kind of like, oh, that's done. You ask the average person now about Hillsborough, and they'll tell you, oh, surely that's finished by now. No, nobody's been convicted. It's always the same. It's like Grenfell, how we're 7 years on, aren't we? 6 or 7 years on, and nobody's been convicted. Lessons haven't been learned. And the more you unravel that thread, the more you go, whoa. And I do think we have not reached that point yet. I think the COVID inquiry will reach that out. But from my point of view, as an educator working in schools, what concerns me is exactly that, clean air. I want our classrooms to be fit for purpose. As a parent of children, that worries me, because are my children being taught in an environment which is fit and healthy for them? And as a teacher, you can hear my voice now. Now, I know I've got a weak chest. I can tell you why. My parents were both smokers. I'm a victim of passive smoking, without a shadow of a doubt. To such an extent, a colleague said to me recently, I get a cold there within the week. I'm barking like I've been smoking 60 Woodbines. But I know that's a legacy of a childhood spent in an environment which was passive smoking. Now, certain things you know about your background, you know you are then going to be, susceptible to certain things because of environmental conditions. And that's not fair on our children in the sixth wealthiest country in the world. That's what worries me. And you're right, Adam. I don't think it is higher up the priority list as it should be, because maybe the more you talk about things like that, the more awkward questions you ask, then the more you have to answer them, don't you?
Well, I just think from all of us, it was just such a kind of we haven't gone through a process kind of post COVID, which we can all kind of collectively kind of almost like mourn or talk about it properly. It was just that was then, this is now, and we've kind of just sleptwalked into this kind of new world where we're not fully kind of dealing with the past, and it's kind of a recent past, isn't it? And we've just kind of really quickly moved on. Sorry, Steve. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What I was going to say was there's two camps really, because I think for many people who maybe they had COVID in those first few years, but maybe not in a bad way, or they've not seen their life changed by it, those people tend to talk about COVID in the past and the pandemic in the past tense, thinking back particularly to the lockdowns in those first 2 years. For those of us who've had our lives changed by COVID, and for those who've lost loved ones, who are living with illness or conditions now, we tend to talk about COVID in the present. And I'm not criticizing people who talk about it in the past, but the reality is, according to the World Health Organization, we're still in the pandemic. And why I speak out is I want to remind people, because sure, we're not in those dark days when the headlines every day on the news were the death toll and it was like the Grim Reaper. But we are in a time which is very, very dangerous, because if you look at the levels of COVID out there now and people who've got COVID now, it's not good. And what's basically happening is, across society, most people now are catching COVID about once a year, sometimes more than that. So a child who's born this year, assuming nothing changes in terms of medical research or science, a child born this year will likely have COVID 12 times by the end of primary school. Every single time a child or an adult gets COVID, it's like Russian roulette, because that could be the time that causes long COVID. That could be the time that causes a blood clot that gives them a heart attack. That could be the one time that causes their immune system to be completely dysregulated.
But you'll always get, and the thing is, Steve, you'll always get, but we have to live with it. We have to get used to it. And we can't live in, I mean, that's the thing. Go like our opening thing about the threads in the Cold War. It's funny, when you live through that, you just got on with it, isn't it? And I do think people have a point. You can't live in that psychosis. You can't live in that fear. You can't let that sort of govern how you live, and equally pass it on to children, because you don't want, as you say, you want to create panic, but you don't want people to be complacent. There's a kind of Goldilocks area, isn't there, where you want that people to be aware, but not to the point where they are petrified. People to be taking precautions, but again, not where their life is ruined by it, and people to be mindful of it, but also not scared. It's a tricky one to get right, isn't it?
It's really tricky, and I've come in for some abuse sometimes, because I'll write something about long COVID or my health, and then somebody will say, hang on a minute, you went to the Young Voices concert in Sheffield and there were thousands of people there. So, these are the choices I'm making, and I've got a young family. No, I'm not saying everybody should mask. I'm not saying I want lockdowns, but let's just think of some really sensible steps. We know about road safety. We don't say never go out and never cross a road because cars are dangerous, but we apply what we know about road safety to keep ourselves safe. So we cross safely, we learn about all those things, and we've done those things for decades. So now we know about COVID, we know it's out there. The safest thing anybody can do for their body is to try not to get COVID in the first place. Yeah. So the best thing you can then do is to put in place some mitigations. So number
it's
one,
funny because literally that's what I was going to ask. But one of our listeners there, JBL, says, if you had your top 3 priorities, what do you think schools should do to make us in a post-COVID?
Top 3 priorities. Number one, clean the air in every classroom. Every employee deserves that. And in my opinion, under the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974, well, I don't know how you can encourage people to go to work with a highly contagious illness that can make you disabled and comply with, what does it say? Secure the health, safety and welfare of persons at work. So clean the air. Secondly, if people are ill, don't have them in work if they're adults, and if they're children, don't have them at school. It's not really rocket science, this. We used to say before the pandemic, before everybody was getting a bit overexcited about attendance management, if people were ill, we used to send them home. And now we're saying, come to work, come to school. You're better off learning. There might be a safeguarding risk at home if you're missing school. If you miss too much school, you won't get your GCSEs. We've gone like really off the beaten track. We just need to say, you're not well. You've got something highly contagious and potentially very dangerous. So if you've got that thing, stay off. Whether you're an adult, whether you're the head teacher, a teaching assistant.
Oh, Steve, you know you're talking to teachers. We're martyrs. You know it.
Yeah, totally. But
come on. I've been in the last week, and you hear my voice. I was like, because it's the only job in the world you fear not being in, because the workload gets exponentially worse when you go back.
Oh, totally. I get that, absolutely. But here's the thing. If somebody said to either of you tonight, okay, you're going to go to work tomorrow, it will be your last day of work ever. You're going to be in a room with someone. You're not going to know it at the time. They've got something that is going to make you very, very ill, possibly for the rest of your life. There is no treatment. Your life as you know it will change profoundly. If you knew that tonight, would you go to work tomorrow?
Doesn't sound very...
I probably would.
Okay. If somebody said your child who is currently healthy,
different. And you see, that's different.
Okay, so
because with my children,
So if somebody said to you tonight, okay, in your class there's 5 children who've got this virus. When your child goes to school tomorrow, they will mix with one of those children, and from then on they will be disabled.
Yeah, that does give me another point that I was going to ask you, Steve. Kind of, there isn't really anything coming from kind of parent bodies about this either, is there? Not that I'm aware of, unless you can tell me differently. I'm not a big parent voice kind of pushing for ventilation in schools.
There's huge amounts, if I'm honest. And I was after you advertised this show, I was contacted by various people, organizations, companies, desperate to get clean air into schools. Over the last couple of years, I've been contacted by generous people who have offered to fund clean air in their own children's schools, but have been told no by the head teacher or the local authority or the trust. There are organizations. It's complex, but it's part of the narrative. But there are good people. There are organizations desperate to put clean air in classrooms. And I know we talk about kind of the cost, but this is the one thing I really can't get my head around. So we know that supply costs. So here's the thing.
Well, Germany did it. I mean, that's the thing that annoys me. Germany, New York, because even during the pandemic, Germany just said, right, we're going to put filtration systems in a lot of our schools and public buildings. They didn't wait. They just said, right, let's do that. And they spent a couple of billion doing that.
Yeah. And so some numbers, sorry, I'm struggling a bit with my cognition here. So some numbers, in 22-23, there were 2.6 million teachers' working days lost in England to illness. I'm not passing on any comment on that. Everybody, if people are ill, they're ill. 2.6 million teacher days. Teacher illness absence is currently 28% higher than the pre-pandemic rate, and it was consistent for years before the pandemic. It was stable. It was roughly 2 million days.
I would be
per
cautious
year.
though about. I suppose I would be cautious about that. I'd say COVID is a contributor, because I know some of that's going to be behavior, some of that's going to be so many different things are playing into what's happening to recruitment. And I think you're right. I think,
Guys, can I just make a suggestion?
it is one aspect of many things which is driving, and I think is a fair.
Brent and Sarah, I'm just going to make a suggestion that we just, if you're okay to stay with us, Steve,
yeah,
we'll go for the whole hour, if that's okay with you, Steve, till 9 o'clock. If we do an ad break now, then we can carry on, and then everyone's happy, kind of the back end as well.
Spot on.
So we say hello to our sponsors for 30 seconds.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK, home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Sorry, thanks both. I don't know what is that the original photo, Brent? Yeah,
Brent is not here any longer. This is baby Brent. That's what it looked like in the 1980s. Look at that bold, look at that bold haircut. Look at that.
Sorry, Brent.
Sorry, thanks for sticking with us, everyone. And we're still joined by myself, Brent, and Steve. We're kind of pulling apart kind of the legacy of COVID, but just interesting, Steve. I just found a kind of quick data kind of show. We've got the hospital beds at the minute. Maybe you can see the data. They've got 2,772 people actually in beds at the minute to COVID, to kind of make that point of this is still a kind of live pandemic, as it were, for lots of people. So do you want to kind of pick up kind of where we just left off?
Sorry. So you were looking through the figures to sort of say pre-COVID, post-COVID staff attendance, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Brent, you're absolutely right. So I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that the increased teacher absence rates are solely related to COVID. That would be really remiss of me. But I think objectively, what we know is from official figures that teacher absence rates are 28% higher for various reasons since the pre-pandemic era. Now,
and I do think that COVID is part of that mix. It is, because there's the pre-COVID, post-COVID. There's definitely a lot of social aspects as well as health aspects that I think are connected as well. I think the COVID and the response to COVID and the whole package is driving some of that, because even the behavior has changed as a result of COVID. So it's easy to see there's a different shift. There's a definite change, isn't there? Yeah,
there is. And that kind of correlates with what we're seeing in pupils, because pupil ill health related absence is approximately 50% higher than it was in the pre-pandemic era. And again, some of that will be COVID directly, some of it will be consequences of COVID, and some of it will be other stuff. But in terms of crude figures, the the associated supply teacher costs to cover the absence in England alone in 22-23 is 698 million, which, if you divide by the number of pupils in maintained schools in England, is £196 per pupil. So we know there's a myriad of reasons why those absences occurred, some of which are directly or indirectly related to COVID. And what we know is schools already under enormous pressure, and this is no judgment on schools and their leaders, because it's horrendous, the pressure that they're under. But we know that many schools have or are facing deficit budgets. And we know that the average per pupil spend is nearly £200 per pupil on supply. Here's the maths. For £20 per pupil, you could put clean air into every classroom. It's actually less than £20 because if you included the number of staff in a school and divided the classrooms, including all the staff, it would be less than £20 a person. So what we know is the cost of supply cover is approximately 10 times the cost of installing clean air in classrooms. If you install clean air in a classroom, you are offering some protection to every member of staff as an employer, duty of care, health and safety at work. You're offering some protection to every pupil, duty of care, safeguarding, keeping children safe in education. You're doing the one thing that's in your control to try and mitigate the spread of an airborne virus. And we know that this will have benefits on physical health, mental health, attendance, engagement, mood, behavior, all of the things that schools are battling with.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is this is one of the things that absolutely summed up, and you're probably going to blow a gasket in this. We got the monitors. So I had two different types of monitors, and I equated getting a CO2 monitor to the equivalent of getting a fire alarm, but no fire escape, nor no fire blanket, and no fire sort of extinguisher. And you're like, hold on, I know my air quality is terrible, and I did look at those meters around some of our classrooms, and look at some of the classrooms in school as a union rep, and I thought, well, that classroom's pretty bad. Spoke to the caretaker, let's try and get the windows open a bit further and try to make as much mitigation. Some of the staff open the door, let the air in. And even I think education on staffing is important sometimes. Because you walk into some classrooms, the heating's on, right? The heating's on, the humidity's stifling, and the member of staff is sitting there going, oh, it's cozy in here. I'm like, cozy? Kids are half asleep. Open some windows. Honestly, I think, I'm not saying, I'm going to trouble here controversially. I think some staff need to ventilate their rooms better. They need to basically think about the airflow around the rooms and apply common sense to get your windows open. It might be 25 degrees. And I do think there are some thermostat staff members who just love sitting beside a radiator and I walk into some rooms and I'm thinking, I can't teach it. Actually, sometimes I refused to teach in one classroom once because I walked in and thought, I'm not going into that room. It's like the Bahamas in there. It's the jungle, and it's better than that.
Yeah.
You know?
Are we in a worse position in the UK because of our kind of the way schools have basically kind of filled up and grown massively over capacity compared to the rest of the world? Is that something we kind of got a kind of unique problem in the UK of? Some cases we've got these kind of older buildings that are now absolutely creaking at the seams. With 35 students in one room. I mean, there was all that research during the lockdown period, wasn't there? We saw these graphs about kind of how air flowed around the room and where kind of, all that business. But we're kind of really packed in, aren't we, in the UK compared to kind of other countries?
I think so. I mean, I don't know whether we're unique in that. Certainly, we have a long history of education and state education. So we've got some Victorian schools, we've got some very modern schools, and then somewhere in between we've got, and there's some, my son's school is about 400 years old, but then we've got this whole mixture, and it probably doesn't help, does it? But the curious thing is, and I know this having been ahead for a long time, we spend a lot of money on school roofs and on repairs and on we have asbestos surveys, we have Legionella checks, We have PAT testing.
Pack testing, yeah.
We do all these things. Why do we do them? To keep ourselves safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, isn't this bizarre? We spend all this money. We have high fences so people can't get in or out. We have a barrier to the car park. We have security cameras. We do all these things in the name of safety. But the one thing now, the biggest thing at the heart of everything is illness. And illness is grappling pupils. There's 10 million children in our schools. It's affecting the workforce. There's 1 million people in the workforce. There's 11 million people under our care.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something affecting them that, apart from the vaccination, we're doing nothing. We're saying, crack on, go to work, go to school. Let's see what happens if you get ill. If you are ill, doesn't matter if you spread it. And then
I'm going to do devil's advocate in this, and this is where you're going to not like me. I think there is a psychology at play, though. I mean, I've gone down to our medical room, and I've got children sitting there, and they're like, "Oh, I've cut my finger." I'm like, "You haven't cut your finger. Get out." And I don't know if we have a society that is struggling with people who are genuinely ill versus some children who, I think, I'll be honest with you, I've not seen such fakery sometimes. And I'm a qualified first aider. When I go down to that medical room, I'm like, "Get out, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with you." And I'll tell you what I actually did recently. I sat in our medical room, took me marking there, and watched as some students came around and thought they were just going to have a little sit and chat in the medical room and pretend not to be ill. As soon as they saw me sitting there, they went the other way. And it's hard. And I do think there are people who are genuinely not playing the game. I think there are people who are, how do I say it? There's a difference between mental health problems causing physical problems and people who are genuinely ill. And I do think there is a problem now of deciding who needs to get out of their bed and go to school, because there are some children who are playing duvet days and they're playing possum, versus children who are generally not well. And it's hard to decide, versus children who are struggling with neurodiversity. I think it's very difficult, isn't it, to decide who is genuinely not well versus not. And the problem with that is you then get everybody caught. It's the boy or girl who cries wolf. Everybody gets caught up in the same net. Schools are under pressure to get attendance up because there are some people who need a hug and need some compassion. And then there are other people who need get into school. Stop this. And it's hard to know who you do that to. You understand what I'm saying? Is there are always children who will say they're not well because they just don't want to go to school because maybe they're school anxious. And that's where they say they're not well, versus a child who is genuinely not well. And it's very hard to get who is who with the NHS in full on retreat and getting appointments. It is, and with NHS mental health in full retreat, it's very hard to get appointments. So therefore, there is a lot of pushes in there. And I don't know if schools are getting it right, because the blanket push on attendance may actually be pushing the other way on some genuine people. But there are some people who I think just need to get into school as well.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's worthy of a whole other show, isn't it? And I better not get on my soapbox on this, but
good old soapbox away.
You might have seen in my other writing, but one of my own children has struggled terribly with their mental health, with an anxiety disorder, and so this is something I'm quite passionate about. I think you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, children are children. So some children try it on. They always have done. It's as old as time. To be honest, some staff try it on as well. And
good point.
You know, that's part of the human condition. Some people have got the strongest constitution, or they're so bloody minded or martyrs that they go to work at all costs. I used to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, you know, phone in sick as an adult when they've got a bit of a sniff, put on a poorly voice. And equally, some children try it on. Mm-hmm. But we've got to a really dangerous point now, because we've reached a point where there's a lot of suspicion and cynicism and skepticism about people's illnesses. And people judge me. People tell me I look okay, so I must be okay. People tell me they can't see my problems, so I'm making it up. I've been out and about, I can't be ill. You know, I must be some sort of benefit fraud. They have no idea of the suffering or the pain I have on any given day. Equally, when my daughter was absolutely consumed with an anxiety disorder and was hurting herself, not eating, not sleeping, having panic attacks in the middle of the night. Oh, sorry, my TV's just turned itself back on. Sorry, 1 second.
I think that's a new one for the show, isn't it? There's the TV background.
Apologies for that. Yeah, people were saying, no, actually, your daughter's fine in school. She's just a bit immature. And I think we have to be really careful. My view is the majority of people in this world are good, honest people. Some people are less honest, but the majority of people, I like to think, are honest. And I think generally, if people are unwell and we know they've got a condition, for example, we should respect that. And more than that, we should try our very best to protect people. To me, it's very simple with COVID. We're talking about an illness that in many people is seemingly innocuous, but in a great many people, it's been life-changing. It can disable you. It can permanently change your life. There are teachers, good educators I know, who've lost their health, their jobs, then their marriages, and then their houses, and then they're living back with their elderly parents because everything's gone because they got an illness. And what should we do as responsible citizens? We should try and look after each other, shouldn't we? It's like knowing that a car can be dangerous and choosing not to wear your seatbelt. We can put clean air in our workplaces to protect children and staff.
Yeah.
We can tell people if they're ill, stay at home so you're not spreading it, because spreading a contagious illness is frankly irresponsible and unethical. You could argue it's negligent. And I think we've got to be really aware that in the future, we could be looking at one of the biggest scandals in history, whereby hundreds of thousands of adults and hundreds of thousands of children will have had their health detrimentally impacted, and questions will be asked of local authorities and trusts who told their workforce and their pupils to go into work, to push through, knowing that they could be spreading a highly contagious, dangerous illness.
That's why I'm so proud. I mean, I can hold my head up. I as a union rep, went in and I laid out our tables, made sure there was a boundary. In fact, some of my colleagues got very annoyed with me because I went into the staff room, emptied the staff room, basically bolted down the chairs. I got very conscious of it's our responsibility to look after the staff. And sometimes they, you know, that meant I went into some rooms, opened the windows and told them it's freezing here. I don't care if it's freezing here, open those windows. Because it was about that. It was about you're doing as much as possible to mitigate the risk as much as possible, because I didn't want it on my conscience that I didn't do as much as possible. And that's the thing, isn't it? It is about looking after people, isn't it? And then you think of the thing in schools is, you're right, we have a responsibility for the most important thing is health and welfare, isn't it? It's got to be health and welfare. And therefore, you know, it is beholden on. So I think one of the things I'll take from this is obviously we need to promote healthy air, even if you don't believe in COVID. I think that's the point, isn't it? What I will say is I had to push back when I was having meetings with some of my colleagues who were told that your attendance is XXX if you miss another day. And I know that some trusts have got teams of HR people that do that type of job, that do say to staff, oh, you've missed X amount of days. And I wonder, are they counting COVID as a legitimate reason? And I wonder where that's gone into some policies, or whether that's just, again, forgotten about. If somebody misses a couple of days, you know, and they've got a couple of bounds of COVID, is that being held against them? Is, you know, it has attendance policies for staff kicked back into that level. Do you know of any scenarios like that, or situations where people have got warnings, written warnings, and been told, you know, you need to be in work, but I've had COVID?
Yeah, I mean,
one time, Steve, you got about 30 seconds for this one.
Oh gosh, I don't know about COVID as a virus, but I'm aware personally of education staff, teachers and leaders and support staff who have been through, they've basically lost their jobs through sickness absence management procedures by being not well enough to do their job anymore. But it comes down to, for me, to this. We talk about keeping children safe in education, and I think we should, because we're a profession of care. But we sometimes forget that safeguarding is a broader term, and part of the UK government's definition of safeguarding is this: preventing harm to children's health or development. And I say, isn't that everybody's duty? You know, we want surely a healthy workforce of teachers and educators who can do their job well and thrive and enjoy it. And we want a healthy nation of children who can go to school knowing they are safe so that they can blossom. And it just strikes me that we should do everything we can, not lock down, not make everyone wear masks, but do the things in our gift to keep people as safe as possible, knowing there's a big danger out there and that lots and lots of people still today are falling ill and will have life-changing conditions which could have been averted.
Can I say thank you, Steve? And also thank you for your service that you gave to the teaching profession over the length of time you give as well, because I know we're running out of head teachers, and it's a shame that you're not in as a head teacher, because we need more of people stepping up, especially in primary, let's be honest, Steve. So thank you for tonight. I know it's you've been very honest. It's not an easy thing for you to talk about, so massive appreciation for that, and thank you for tonight. Appreciate that.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And look after yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you too. And thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh wow! Some hard stuff tonight, Brent. That we kind of need to kind of pull apart, but that's what it's all about. Is it's about tuning in and talking it out. Next week we're going to have a look at Black history in education. We're going to look at it from a couple of sides. We want to kind of celebrate the Black community in education, but we also do want to have a kind of critical look about the concept, I guess, of Black History Month, and whether there should be more about kind of Black history kind of more embedded into our education. So maybe there's a call, maybe there's a call for not having such a dedicated time. Maybe we should be thinking about more interweaving Black culture, Black history, and all of that into kind of our everyday teaching. Rather than just, so
it's less the tokenism and the kind of like, oh, we've done Black History Month, we've done a lesson on the Black tutors, we've done less a tick boxing exercise and more a serious sort of case of making the curriculum reflect the diversity of the country that we currently live in, and the children seeing themselves in that curriculum. And there are lots of great steps being taken in certainly in subjects like history, but it's looking at the broader spectrum of it. What is the whole purpose behind, said, Black History Month, and equally, how can it be done? But more interested with anybody who wants to DM us, anybody with any ideas, anybody who wants to come on and speak about that, I'm more than happy to platform as many people as possible in this one.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear kind of lots of different perspectives on that. If you want to listen back to previous Education Tonights, you can do so by clicking on the QR code. Also, if you'd like to be maybe a host like me and Brent have done tonight, there's lots of different avenues. There's podcasts, there's live X shows, there's lots of things going on. You can be involved in the live subject-based kind of events and meetups that happen as well. I know Brent kind of just done one for history.
Modern foreign language coming up in November as well.
Coming up as well. We do want to say before we go tonight, thank you very much to John Catt, John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And you can see it kind of coming across the bottom there. They obviously they level up your professional development, and you can visit johncattbookshop.com to explore a full range of titles. And if you see the code at the bottom of the screen there, JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. There it goes. And Reading Solutions, which is the home of the Dreambox Reading Plus, which is a online reading development program to create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE. Reading Plus is evidence-based adaptive technology. It is used as part of that kind of program. Reading Plus accurately assesses students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway built to accelerate their strengths to improve their areas for development. And you can, this is the good news, you can try the program for a 4-week pilot today just by searching Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot. As I said, there's lots to kind of take away from tonight. If there's feels kind of is obligatory to say these things, but I genuinely mean it. If you are suffering and you are kind of as it gets darker, as the nights kind of draw in, as it kind of gets colder and in the morning, this is the bit where we really do have to look after ourselves as a staff body, and really kind of think about yourself, think about the situations that you're in, and take those kind of, have a look at do a mini risk assessment for yourself, on how you're feeling as well, because we need great teachers, and we need great teachers that last a long time in education. We don't want this kind of retention and recruitment kind of merry-go-round that's going around. Schools are great because of the experience that's within them, and we need those people to be both mentally and physically kind of happy and well. So please take care as we come up to a very quick. It feels like a very quick half term. I don't know about you, Brent. It's kind of flying by, isn't it?
Yes and no. It's been I was looking tonight, the sunset was coming at about 6:15. It was beautiful sunset tonight, and then as we're looking at the clocks going, and it's definitely the autumn. You could see the leaves turning, and it's got that crisper, and equally the weather's been a lot wet recently. It doesn't feel like we've had summer. It's a strange one, isn't it? It feels like we haven't really had. Yeah, so but at the same time, it's been a good term. I think things are in education seem to settling down. There's a definite bit of a positivity about possibly the new government, the pay rise coming through as well. So there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel in teaching. And I would echo what Adam said about look after yourselves. Don't be a martyr. Your health and your welfare. I often equate it to, if you look after yourself, it's the oxygen mask analogy, isn't it? On the airplane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first, so that you can put the oxygen mask on the children. So it's a little bit of that comes first of, because we are altruistic and we are hardworking, and those of us in education, and we give far too much sometimes. But that's the nature of why we do what we do. But just don't forget yourselves, and forget obviously your own health and your own well-being.
Okay, well, look after yourself, and thanks for Hannah behind the scenes for keeping us all on track this evening. Thank you again to Steve, and we'll see you at the same time next week. Have a good week. Goodbye.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused